He believed the ceremonial guard was just for show, carrying an empty weapon as part of a tourist attraction. However, when he lunged for the rifle in a desperate attempt to escape justice, the metallic sound that echoed through Buckingham Palace would teach him that some mistakes can never be undone. Before we go on, please tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Also, subscribe to the channel if you respect the royal guards. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, where hundreds of tourists gathered in anticipation of the changing of the guard ceremony. The iconic black railings gleamed in the golden light, and the familiar red tunics of the Queen's Guard created splashes of brilliant colour against the pale stone facade of the palace. It was a scene that had played out thousands of times before, a perfect blend of pageantry, tradition, and the kind of spectacular ceremony that drew visitors from around the world. Standing at his assigned position near the palace gates, Guardsman Thomas Hartwell of the Coldstream Guards maintained the perfect stillness that had become synonymous with British military discipline. His scarlet tunic was immaculate, every brass button polished to mirror brightness, his bearskin cap positioned with mathematical precision. The SA-80 rifle in his hands was held at the regulation present arms position, its weight distributed with the unconscious ease that came from countless hours of drill and genuine combat experience. To the casual observer, Hartwell appeared to be exactly what most tourists expected, a ceremonial figure, part of the grand theatre of British royal tradition. His stillness was so complete, his bearing so statuesque, that many visitors assumed he was more decoration than soldier, more pageantry than protection. But appearances, as events would soon prove, could be devastatingly deceiving. Thomas Hartwell was no ceremonial ornament. Behind the motionless facade stood a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan, a qualified marksman who had earned his position through exceptional service in some of the world's most dangerous combat zones. His hands, steady and sure on his rifle, had engaged enemy combatants in firefights that lasted for hours. His eyes, which now stared straight ahead with ceremonial discipline, had scanned hostile terrain for threats that could materialize in an instant. The rifle he carried was not a prop or a museum piece, but a fully functional SA-80 assault rifle, loaded and ready for immediate deployment. The Queen's Guard were not actors in costume, but active duty soldiers, each one a specialist in their field, each one capable of transitioning from ceremonial duties to lethal force in the space of a heartbeat. Among the crowds gathering for the ceremony that afternoon was someone who understood none of this complexity, none of this dangerous competence barely contained beneath the surface of royal tradition. Derek "Deco" Morrison was a career criminal whose life had been an unbroken chain of poor decisions, failed schemes, and escalating desperation. At 38 years old, he had spent more time in prison than out, with a record that included burglary, assault, drug possession, and a growing pattern of increasingly reckless behavior driven by addiction and mounting debt. Deco had come to Buckingham Palace not as a tourist, but as a fugitive. 3 hours earlier, he had botched an attempted robbery at a jewelry shop in Hatton Garden, fleeing when the silent alarm triggered faster than he had anticipated. Now, with police sirens echoing through central London and his face likely already circulating through law enforcement networks, he was desperately seeking any opportunity to escape the tightening net of pursuit. In his drug-addled, panic-driven state, Deco had convinced himself that the crowds around Buckingham Palace provided perfect cover. Hundreds of tourists, multiple exit points, and enough chaos to slip away unnoticed. It seemed like the ideal place to disappear until the immediate heat died down. But as he moved through the crowds, trying to blend in with the legitimate tourists while constantly scanning for police uniforms, Deco's desperation was beginning to override what little rational thinking he possessed. His eyes fell on Guardsman Hartwell, standing motionless at his post, and a plan began forming in his criminal mind. A plan so fundamentally flawed, so completely based on ignorance and desperation, that it would have been laughable if not for the serious consequences it was about to unleash. "Look at him," Deco muttered to himself, studying Hartwell's perfectly still form. "Just standing there like a bloody mannequin. Probably not even a real gun. Just some prop for the tourists." In Deco's limited worldview, shaped by years of criminal thinking and drug-induced paranoia, everything was either a threat or an opportunity. The Royal Guards, with their elaborate uniforms and ceremonial bearing, looked like opportunities, specifically like sources of weapons that could help him fight his way out of his current predicament. The logic, such as it was, seemed clear to his addled mind. Grab the guard's rifle, use it to intimidate any pursuing police, and fight his way to freedom. The guard wouldn't resist. He was probably just some ceremonial soldier who had never seen real action. The weapon was probably empty anyway, just part of the show. It was a plan born of desperation, ignorance, and the kind of criminal arrogance that had landed Deco in trouble his entire life. And like most of his schemes, it was about to go catastrophically wrong. As Deco began moving toward Hartwell's position, other people in the crowd started to notice his behavior. Unlike the respectful tourists who maintained appropriate distances and spoke in hushed tones, Deco moved with the aggressive purposefulness of someone with criminal intent. "Excuse me," called out Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a retired schoolteacher from Yorkshire who had immediately recognized something unsettling about Deco's approach. "I don't think you should get so close to the guard." Deco barely acknowledged her, his attention fully focused on what he saw as his escape route. But Mrs. Whitman's warning had alerted other nearby tourists, including several with military backgrounds who began to sense that something was seriously wrong. "That man's acting strangely," observed Colonel retired James Pemberton, whose 40 years of military service had given him an instinctive ability to recognize potential threats. "Someone should alert security." But events were moving too quickly for intervention. Deco, driven by mounting panic, and the desperate logic of a cornered criminal, had made his decision. In his mind, he was moments away from solving all his problems with one bold stroke. What Deco didn't understand, what his criminal background and drug-damaged thinking prevented him from grasping, was that he was about to attack not a ceremonial figure, but one of Britain's most elite warriors, in front of one of the world's most heavily protected buildings, while carrying out an act that would be considered an assault on the crown itself. The Royal Guards operated under specific rules of engagement that had been refined over centuries of protecting the monarchy. They were authorized to use appropriate force to defend themselves, their posts, and the royal family. Any attempt to disarm a guard was considered a direct threat to national security, justifying immediate and overwhelming response. But Deco knew none of this. In his limited understanding, he was simply grabbing a prop from an actor in a costume. "Right then," he muttered under his breath, psyching himself up for what he believed would be a simple snatch and grab. "Time to get myself some proper protection." He approached Hartwell's position with the kind of casual confidence that came from years of criminal activity and a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation he was entering. The tourists around him began to sense something wrong, but the speed of his approach left little time for intervention. Deco was now within arm's reach of the guard, close enough to see the details of Hartwell's uniform, the precise stitching, the military insignia, the small ribbon bars that indicated various awards and service medals. But his criminal mind interpreted these symbols not as indicators of genuine military service, but as props in an elaborate show. "Sorry, mate," Deco said with mock politeness as he reached toward the rifle. "But I need this more than you do." What happened next unfolded with the kind of lightning-fast precision that separated trained soldiers from ordinary civilians. The moment Deco's hand made contact with the SA-80, Guardsman Hartwell's training took over with machine-like efficiency. Years of combat experience and weapons drill had honed his reflexes to the point where his response was faster than conscious thought. Hartwell's grip on the rifle tightened imperceptibly, his stance shifted by degrees that would be invisible to casual observers, and his entire body prepared for combat in ways that Deco couldn't possibly comprehend. But it was the sound that followed that would haunt Deco for the rest of his life. Click. The metallic sound of the SA-80's safety being disengaged echoed across the forecourt like a gunshot. It was a small sound, barely audible over the ambient noise of London traffic and tourist chatter, but to anyone with military experience, it was unmistakable and terrifying. The sound of a weapon being made ready for combat. The effect on the crowd was immediate and electric. Tourists with military backgrounds recognized the sound instantly and began moving away from the developing confrontation. Parents grabbed their children and started backing toward safer positions. Even civilians without combat experience sensed that something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere around the palace gates. But the most dramatic effect was on Deco himself. The career criminal, who had spent decades around weapons of various kinds, recognized that sound with crystal clarity. It was the sound of a rifle being prepared to fire. Not a prop, not a decoration, not a ceremonial object, but a real, functional, deadly weapon in the hands of someone who clearly knew how to use it. "Oh, Christ," Deco whispered, his hand freezing on the rifle as the full implications of his situation crashed over him like a cold wave. He was not grabbing a prop from an actor. He was attempting to disarm an active duty soldier carrying a loaded assault rifle in front of one of the most heavily guarded buildings in the world. Hartwell's voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to life and death command decisions. "Remove your hand from my weapon, now!" Each word was delivered with military precision, leaving no doubt about the seriousness of the situation or the consequences of non-compliance. This was not a request or a suggestion. It was a direct order from a professional soldier who was prepared to enforce it with lethal force if necessary. Deco's drug-addled brain struggled to process the speed with which his simple plan had turned into a life-threatening crisis. The rifle under his hand was not just real. It was ready to fire, held by someone who clearly had the training and authority to use it. I was just... Deco stammered, but words failed him as he realized there was no explanation that could possibly justify what he had just attempted. "Step back and place your hands behind your head," Hartwell continued, his voice never rising but somehow filling the entire area around the palace gates. "Any sudden movement will be considered a hostile act." The crowd of tourists had now formed a loose circle around the confrontation, everyone maintaining respectful distance while recording the incident on their phones. But instead of the entertainment they might have expected, they were witnessing a masterclass in professional military response to a genuine threat. Deco looked around desperately, seeking some escape route or support from the crowd. But the faces that looked back at him ranged from frightened to disgusted to simply fascinated by the unfolding drama. His attempt to blend in with innocent tourists had evaporated the moment he touched the guard's weapon. "Please," he said, his voice cracking with panic. "I didn't mean anything by it. I thought it was just for show." Hartwell's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested that Deco's ignorance was not considered a mitigating factor. "Ignorance of military protocol does not excuse assault on a member of the Queen's Guard," Hartwell replied with clinical precision. "You have committed a serious criminal offense and will be detained until proper authorities arrive." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching sirens began to echo through the streets around Buckingham Palace. The palace's sophisticated security network had detected the threat within seconds of its development, and multiple response units were already converging on the scene. But it was another sound that truly drove home the reality of Deco's situation. the subtle but unmistakable noise of additional guards moving into supporting positions around the palace perimeter. What had seemed like isolated ceremonial figures were revealing themselves as part of a coordinated security system that could respond to threats with overwhelming force. Deco's head turned frantically as he began to understand that he was not dealing with a single guard, but with an entire network of professional soldiers who were now treating him as a serious security threat to the crown. "I want to surrender," he said suddenly, his voice rising with panic. "I give up. I don't want any trouble." "Then remove your hand from my weapon and comply with instructions," Hartwell replied with the same calm authority he had maintained throughout the encounter. Deco's hand fell away from the rifle as if it had suddenly become red-hot. He stumbled backward, his legs unsteady with fear and the realization of how completely he had misjudged the situation. "Hands behind your head," Hartwell repeated, his rifle now subtly repositioned to maintain tactical advantage while appearing to resume ceremonial bearing. Deco complied immediately, his hands shaking as he interlaced his fingers behind his skull. The casual confidence he had shown just minutes earlier had evaporated entirely, replaced by the terrified compliance of someone who suddenly understood they were completely outmatched. The first police officers arrived within 60 seconds of Hartwell's initial challenge, emerging from unmarked vehicles that had been positioned around the palace as part of the standard security arrangements. But these were not ordinary constables. They were armed members of the Diplomatic Protection Group, specialists in dealing with threats to high-value targets. "Armed police!" called out the lead officer as his team moved into position around Deco. "Do not move! Keep your hands visible!" Deco found himself surrounded by professional law enforcement officers carrying automatic weapons and wearing tactical gear that made it clear they were prepared for serious threats. The contrast between his position and theirs was so stark that even his drug-addled mind could grasp the hopelessness of resistance. "I surrender," he called out, his voice breaking with terror. "I give up. Please don't shoot." The arrest that followed was swift, professional, and thorough. Deco was searched, handcuffed, and secured in an armored police vehicle, while crime scene technicians began documenting the incident and palace security conducted a comprehensive review of the entire event. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of the entire response was Guardsman Hartwell's immediate return to ceremonial duties once the threat had been neutralized. With the same fluid precision that had characterized his response to Deco's attack, Hartwell resumed his ceremonial position. Rifle returned to present arms, eyes fixed straight ahead, posture perfect and motionless. To a casual observer approaching the scene after the arrest, it would appear as though nothing had happened at all. The transformation was so complete and so immediate that several tourists who had witnessed the entire confrontation stared in amazement. One moment Hartwell had been a combat-ready soldier dealing with a genuine threat. The next, he was once again the perfect ceremonial figure that symbolized centuries of British military tradition. But everyone present understood that they had just witnessed something extraordinary, a demonstration of how the pageantry and ceremony of royal traditions were backed by genuine military competence and deadly serious protective capabilities. The crowd began to disperse as normal palace security resumed, but many tourists stopped to express their appreciation to Hartwell as they passed his position. Children asked their parents about military service, clearly impressed by the guards' professional handling of a dangerous situation. Colonel Pemberton, the retired military officer who had first sensed trouble, approached Hartwell's position and offered a respectful nod. "Outstanding work, Guardsman," he said quietly. "Textbook response to a weapons grab. Your training showed—" Hartwell acknowledged the compliment with the slightest inclination of his head, the minimum recognition possible without breaking ceremonial protocol. As the afternoon progressed and normal tourist activity resumed around the palace, the full scope of Deco's mistake began to emerge through police investigation. The career criminal had not simply attempted to steal a prop from a costumed actor. He had committed assault on a member of the Queen's Guard, attempted theft of military weapons, created a security threat at a royal residence, and violated numerous laws related to the protection of the monarchy. Under British law, attacks on royal guards were considered assaults on the crown itself, carrying penalties far more severe than ordinary criminal offences. Deco's drug-fueled desperation had led him to commit what amounted to an act of treason, with legal consequences that would likely keep him in prison for decades. But perhaps more significantly, his actions had provided a powerful demonstration of why the royal guards carried real weapons and maintained such rigorous training standards. The ceremony and pageantry were not empty traditions, but carefully maintained systems that served genuine protective functions. The guards' discipline and bearing were not theatrical performances, but military protocols designed to project strength while maintaining readiness for instant response to actual threats. Deco's ignorant assumption that the guards were merely decorative had been shattered by the reality of professional military training and genuine protective capability. As evening fell over Buckingham Palace and the day's ceremonies concluded, Guardsman Hartwell completed his shift and was relieved by the next guard rotation. He returned to the guard quarters, where he was greeted by congratulations from his fellow soldiers and commendations from his superior officers. "Excellent work today, Hartwell," his sergeant major commented. "Perfect example of maintaining ceremonial bearing while responding to a genuine threat." Hartwell accepted the praise with characteristic military modesty. "Just following protocol, Sergeant Major. Threat was neutralized without compromising security or endangering civilians." But privately, he felt deep satisfaction at having demonstrated that the royal guards were not costume performers, but genuine protectors of the crown and its traditions. The incident with Deco had provided an opportunity to show the world that British military ceremony was backed by substance, that the pageantry served genuine protective functions, and that the ancient traditions were maintained by modern warriors who could transition from ceremonial duties to lethal force in an instant. Word of the incident spread quickly through social media and news outlets, but instead of undermining respect for royal traditions, it enhanced understanding of their genuine importance and protective value. Videos of Hartwell's professional response, captured by multiple tourists and security cameras, went viral as examples of perfect military discipline under pressure. The hashtag #RealGuards began trending as people shared stories and information about the genuine military service that backed up the ceremonial duties. Military recruitment offices reported increased interest from young people who had been inspired by Hartwell's demonstration of professionalism and competence under pressure. Educational institutions began using the incident as a case study in how traditional ceremonies could serve modern protective functions, and how military discipline could be maintained even while dealing with genuine threats. But perhaps most importantly, the incident had restored public understanding of what the Royal Guards actually represented, not quaint traditions or tourist attractions, but active duty soldiers whose ceremony and pageantry concealed deadly serious protective capabilities. Meanwhile, in his holding cell at a central London police station, Deco was slowly coming to terms with the magnitude of his mistake. The simple plan that had seemed so obvious in his drug-addled desperation, grab a ceremonial weapon from a costumed guard, had revealed itself as an assault on one of Britain's most elite military units in front of one of the world's most heavily protected buildings. His court-appointed solicitor had already explained that he was facing charges that could result in a life sentence, and that his previous criminal record would make any plea for leniency extremely difficult. But more than the legal consequences, Deco was haunted by that sound, the metallic click of a real weapon being made ready for combat. It was the sound of his assumptions being shattered, of his criminal worldview being revealed as catastrophically inadequate for the reality he had stumbled into. He had expected to intimidate an actor in a costume. Instead, He had threatened a combat veteran carrying a loaded assault rifle with full authority to use lethal force in defense of the crown. The sound of that safety being disengaged would echo in his memory for the rest of his life, a constant reminder of the moment when his criminal career had finally led him to attempt something so far beyond his understanding that it had destroyed any possibility of future freedom. As the weeks passed and Deco's case moved through the legal system, it became a landmark example of the serious consequences that awaited anyone who mistook British ceremonial traditions for empty pageantry. The Royal Guards continued their duties with the same perfect discipline and deadly competence they had always maintained, but now with enhanced public understanding and respect for their genuine protective role. The ancient stones of Buckingham Palace had witnessed countless ceremonies over the centuries, but few had provided such a clear demonstration of how tradition and modernity, ceremony and substance, pageantry and protection could be seamlessly integrated into a single, formidable system. Deco's desperate attempt to exploit what he saw as ceremonial weakness had instead revealed the iron strength that lay beneath the velvet glove of royal tradition, a strength maintained by genuine warriors who could shift from ceremony to combat in the space of a heartbeat, triggered by nothing more than the metallic click of a weapon being made ready to defend the crown. The news of Deco's arrest and the circumstances surrounding it spread through London's criminal underworld like wildfire. For years, petty criminals and opportunistic thieves had viewed the Royal Guards as easy targets, ceremonial figures carrying props, bound by protocol to remain motionless while criminals operated around them. Deco's catastrophic mistake had shattered that dangerous misconception permanently. In pubs and back alleys where London's criminal element gathered, the story was told and retold with growing embellishment, but the core message remained constant. The Royal Guards were not targets of opportunity, but genuine threats to anyone stupid enough to test them. "Did you hear what happened to Deco?" Criminals would whisper to each other. Tried to nick a guard's rifle, thinking it was fake. Nearly got himself shot by a proper soldier. 20 years they're giving him, minimum. The psychological impact on London's criminal community was profound. Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and other royal residences had always been avoided by serious criminals due to their obvious security measures. But even petty thieves and opportunistic criminals had sometimes tried to operate in the crowds of tourists, assuming the ceremonial guards would be unable or unwilling to intervene. Deco's experience had eliminated that assumption entirely. Word spread quickly that the guards carried real weapons, had real authority, and possessed real combat experience that made them extremely dangerous to approach with criminal intent. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen of the Metropolitan Police's Royalty and Specialist Protection Command had been tracking this cultural shift within London's criminal community with professional interest. As the officer responsible for coordinating security around royal residences, she understood that Deco's arrest represented more than just one criminal's poor judgment. It was a teaching moment that would enhance security for years to come. "The incident with Morrison has had a significant deterrent effect," she reported to her superior officers. "Intelligence suggests that criminal elements are actively avoiding royal residences and ceremonial events. The Guard's reputation for professional competence has been substantially enhanced." This deterrent effect extended far beyond London's borders. International criminal organizations, terrorist groups, and other threats to royal security had always factored the Royal Guards into their threat assessments, but Deco's experience provided valuable intelligence about the Guards' response protocols and capabilities. Security analysts around the world began studying footage of Hartwell's response, noting the speed of his weapon transition, the precision of his verbal commands, and the seamless coordination with backup forces. The incident had inadvertently provided a demonstration of British royal security capabilities that would influence threat calculations for years to come. But the impact was not limited to criminal deterrence. The incident had also sparked renewed public interest in the genuine role and qualifications of the Royal Guards. Dr. Margaret Thornton, a military historian at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, found herself fielding dozens of media requests about the Guards' selection criteria, training requirements, and service records. The public perception of the Royal Guards has been unfortunate oversimplified, she explained to a BBC interviewer. These positions are not ceremonial appointments, but military honours earned through exceptional service. Every Guard has demonstrated combat competence, leadership ability, and the kind of discipline that makes them suitable for protecting the royal family. She pulled up service records, names and details redacted for security purposes, that painted a picture of the Guard's true qualifications. The average Royal Guard has completed multiple combat deployments, Dr. Thornton continued. Many hold advanced military qualifications, paratrooper wings, commando training, specialized weapons certifications. They are selected not for their ability to stand still, but for their proven performance under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The Guards' training regimen, she explained, combined traditional ceremonial drill with cutting-edge security protocols and combat readiness requirements. They practiced weapons transitions, threat assessment, crowd control, and close protection techniques with the same intensity that they devoted to perfecting their ceremonial bearing. What happened with Mr. Morrison was not unusual or exceptional from a training perspective, Dr. Thornton noted. It was simply a routine application of standard protocols by a professional soldier who had been thoroughly prepared for exactly that type of situation. This educational campaign had a profound impact on public perception of royal ceremonies. Tourist guides began incorporating information about the Guards' genuine qualifications into their presentations, explaining that the pageantry was backed by substance and that the ceremony served genuine protective functions. The Tower of London, Windsor Castle, and Buckingham Palace all reported increased visitor satisfaction as tourists gained deeper understanding of what they were witnessing. Instead of viewing the Guards as quaint anachronisms, visitors began to appreciate them as living embodiments of military excellence and royal protection. Meanwhile, within the military community itself, Hartwell's handling of the Morrison incident had become a case study in perfect protocol execution. At the Royal Military Academy, officer candidates studied video footage of the encounter as an example of how to maintain ceremonial composure while responding to genuine threats. The incident was broken down second by second, analyzing Hartwell's weapon positioning, verbal commands, tactical awareness, and coordination with supporting forces. Note the seamless transition from ceremonial to combat ready, instructors would explain to their students. Guardsman Hartwell never abandoned his post, never lost situational awareness, and never escalated beyond the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. The incident had also prompted a comprehensive review of Royal Guard protocols and training procedures. While the response had been textbook perfect, military planners used the opportunity to identify potential improvements and refinements to existing procedures. New training scenarios were developed that incorporated lessons learned from the Morrison encounter. Guards practiced responding to attempted weapon grabs, verbal de-escalation techniques, and coordination with civilian law enforcement and palace security systems. But perhaps most importantly, the incident had reinforced the psychological preparation that made Royal Guards so effective in their dual role as ceremonial figures and protective personnel. The key to Royal Guard service, explained Sergeant Major William Davies, who oversaw training at the Guards Division, is the ability to maintain perfect discipline while remaining constantly ready for instant action. Ceremonial bearing is not passivity, it's controlled readiness. This concept of controlled readiness was difficult for civilians to understand but crucial for military effectiveness. The Guards' stillness was not inaction, but the physical manifestation of total situational awareness and prepared response capability. Every Guard is constantly assessing threats, monitoring crowd behavior, and maintaining tactical awareness of their environment. Sergeant Major Davies continued. The ceremony provides cover for this activity, allowing them to observe and prepare without appearing threatening to legitimate visitors. Hartwell's response to Morrison had demonstrated this principle perfectly. To observers, he had appeared to transition instantly from ceremonial figure to combat-ready soldier. In reality, he had been tactically aware and prepared from the moment Morrison entered his area of responsibility. The incident had also highlighted the sophisticated support systems that backed up each individual guard. Within seconds of Morrison's attack, additional guards had moved into supporting positions, police response units had been activated, and comprehensive security protocols had been implemented. No Royal Guard operates in isolation, explained Detective Inspector Chen. Each ceremonial position is part of an integrated security network that can respond to threats with overwhelming force if necessary. This network included not only the visible guards and police officers, but also plainclothes security personnel, electronic surveillance systems, and rapid response teams positioned throughout royal residences. Morrison's attempt to exploit what he saw as an isolated, vulnerable target had actually triggered a response from one of the world's most sophisticated security systems, a system designed and refined over centuries of protecting the British monarchy from every conceivable threat. The legal proceedings that followed Morrison's arrest had provided additional educational value about the serious consequences of attacking royal security. During his sentencing hearing, the judge had taken the unusual step of explaining the historical and legal context of Morrison's crimes to emphasize their severity. The defendant has committed what amounts to an assault on the Crown itself, His Honour Judge Patricia Whitfield explained from the bench. The Royal Guards are not merely ceremonial figures, but sworn protectors of the monarchy, and attacks upon them are treated with the utmost seriousness under British law. Morrison's defense attorney had attempted to argue that his client's drug addiction and desperate circumstances should be considered mitigating factors, but the judge had rejected this reasoning decisively. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, and personal circumstances do not excuse attacks on fundamental institutions of the state. Judge Whitfield stated. The defendant's actions represented a serious breach of public order and a direct threat to royal security. The 22-year sentence that Morrison ultimately received had sent shockwaves through London's criminal community and served as a powerful deterrent to anyone considering similar actions. But beyond the immediate deterrent effect, the legal proceedings had also established important precedents about the protection of royal ceremonies and the authority of the guards to respond to threats. Legal scholars noted that the case had clarified the extent of the guards' authority and the circumstances under which they could transition from ceremonial to enforcement functions. The Morrison case establishes clear legal precedent that royal guards possess full law enforcement authority within their areas of responsibility, explained Professor James Mackenzie of the London School of Economics. They are not merely ceremonial figures, but sworn peace officers with the power to detain, arrest, and use appropriate force to maintain security. This legal clarification had important implications for future security planning and training. Guards could now point to established case law when explaining their authority to potential troublemakers, and security planners could develop protocols with clear legal backing. The incident had also prompted international interest in British royal security procedures. Diplomatic security services from around the world had requested briefings on the Guards' training and response protocols, recognizing the effectiveness of combining ceremonial duties with genuine protective capabilities. Several countries with their own ceremonial guard units had implemented training improvements based on lessons learned from the Morrison incident. The integration of ceremony and security that the British had perfected over centuries was being studied and adapted by security services worldwide. 6 months after the incident, Guardsman Hartwell found himself promoted to Lance Corporal and assigned to an advanced training position within the Guards Division. His handling of the Morrison situation had marked him as someone with exceptional potential for leadership and instruction. Hartwell's response demonstrated all the qualities we look for in our senior personnel, explained his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ashworth. Perfect discipline under pressure, flawless execution of protocols, and the ability to de-escalate a dangerous situation without compromising security or endangering civilians. In his new role, Hartwell was responsible for training the next generation of Royal Guards, sharing the lessons learned from his confrontation with Morrison and helping to refine the protocols that had served him so well. The key lesson from the Morrison incident, Hartwell would tell his trainees, is that ceremony and security are not contradictory, but complementary. Our ceremonial bearing provides the framework for effective security operations, and our security readiness gives meaning and substance to our ceremonial duties. This integration of tradition and modernity, ceremony and substance, had become the defining characteristic of the modern Royal Guards. They embodied the idea that ancient institutions could adapt to contemporary challenges without losing their essential character or effectiveness. The Morrison incident had also sparked broader discussions about the role of tradition in modern security operations. Military planners and security experts had begun to recognize that ceremonial procedures could actually enhance rather than hinder effective protective operations. Traditional military ceremonies serve important psychological and tactical functions, explained Dr. Rebecca Harrison, a security studies expert at King's College London. They project strength and stability while providing cover for sophisticated security operations. The Royal Guard's ability to maintain perfect ceremonial bearing while remaining tactically ready had inspired security services around the world to reconsider their own approaches to protecting high-value targets and public events. The incident had also highlighted the importance of proper intelligence and threat assessment in maintaining effective security. Morrison's criminal background and drug addiction had made him predictable in his desperation and poor judgment, but more sophisticated threats would require more nuanced responses. The Morrison case represents a relatively simple threat scenario, noted Detective Inspector Chen, but it demonstrates the principles and procedures that allow us to respond to much more complex and dangerous situations. The Royal Guard's training now incorporated scenarios involving everything from lone wolf attackers to coordinated terrorist operations, building on the foundation of discipline and readiness that had served Hartwell so well in his confrontation with Morrison. As the anniversary of the incident approached, media outlets began producing retrospective analyses of its impact on royal security and public perception of the Guards. The consensus among security experts was that Morrison's failed attack had inadvertently provided one of the most effective demonstrations of royal security capabilities in decades. The incident served as a real-world validation of training procedures and protocols, explained Professor Mackenzie. It showed that the system works exactly as designed, with individual guards capable of responding effectively to immediate threats, while broader security networks provide comprehensive support. The educational value had extended far beyond the security community. Schools throughout Britain had incorporated the incident into citizenship and history curricula, using it to explain the evolution of British institutions and the integration of tradition with modern requirements. Students learned about the historical development of the Royal Guards, their role in protecting the monarchy through centuries of political and social change, and the way that ancient ceremonies had adapted to serve contemporary security needs. The Morrison incident helped students understand that British traditions are not museum pieces, but living institutions that continue to serve important functions, explained Sarah Williams, a history teacher in Manchester. The Royal Guards represent the best of British values: service, discipline, professionalism, and the idea that tradition and progress can work together. This educational impact had contributed to increased public support for the monarchy and military institutions generally. Opinion polls showed significant increases in public confidence in royal security and appreciation for the Guards' professionalism and competence. The incident had also inspired a new generation of young people to consider military service, particularly with the Guards regiments. Recruitment offices reported substantial increases in applications from candidates who had been inspired by Hartwell's demonstration of professional competence under pressure. The Morrison incident showed young people what modern military service actually looks like, explained Colonel Sarah Mitchell, head of Guards recruitment. It demonstrated that military traditions are not outdated, but represent proven methods for developing the kind of character and competence that society needs. As Deco Morrison began serving his lengthy prison sentence, he had time to reflect on the chain of poor decisions that had led him to attack one of Britain's most elite soldiers in front of one of the world's most heavily protected buildings. The sound that had ended his criminal career, that metallic click of a real weapon being made ready for combat, continued to haunt his dreams. It was the sound of reality intruding on his delusional assumptions, of professional competence meeting criminal desperation, of ancient traditions revealing their modern substance. In his more lucid moments, Morrison began to understand that his mistake had been about more than just misunderstanding military protocol. He had failed to recognize that some institutions commanded respect, not because of arbitrary authority, but because of genuine competence and earned trust. The Royal Guards represented something that his criminal worldview had never allowed him to understand: the idea that people could dedicate their lives to serving something greater than themselves, that discipline and tradition could create rather than restrict human potential, and that ceremony could be backed by substance rather than empty pageantry. Meanwhile, the Royal Guards continued their eternal watch over Britain's royal residences, their perfect ceremonial bearing now understood by the public as the visible manifestation of genuine protective capability rather than empty tradition. The ancient stones of Buckingham Palace had witnessed countless events over the centuries, but few had provided such a clear demonstration of how British institutions had evolved to meet modern challenges while maintaining their essential character and values. Morrison's desperate attempt to exploit what he saw as ceremonial weakness had instead revealed the iron strength that lay beneath the velvet glove of royal tradition. A strength maintained by genuine warriors who could shift from ceremony to combat in the space of a heartbeat, triggered by nothing more than the metallic click of a weapon being made ready to defend the crown. The sound that had made Morrison surrender would echo through the corridors of power and the streets of London for years to come, a reminder that Britain's ancient institutions remained as formidable as ever, backed by the dedication and competence of those who had sworn to protect them. What are your thoughts about this clash between criminal desperation and military professionalism? Share your opinions in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel.